I started to play the guitar when I was 9 years of age. For some reason, it was the instrument of choice. My brother Carl, who's 3 years older than I, he was playing saxophone and playing big band music. And I figured, for some reason, I can never figure out why, guitar was the instrument I wanted to learn. And my dad went to a Goodwill shop, a secondhand shop, and came home with a Gibson guitar. And I started to learn. And what I was learning initially was just how to read music straight out of the old Mel Bay books and how to play tunes like Autumn Leaves. By the time I was 11, I was sort of drifting away from playing guitar and going more to the outdoors, playing handball and basketball. And that was my interest. And I went to Brooklyn Technical High School, which was all boys. And I must have entered there when I was about 13 or 14. And at the age of 15, I asked my brother, I said, I want to start playing guitar again. And he said, well, why don't you just go down to Greenwich Village and check out the music people are playing down there, because you might like some of the music, Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger. And on Sundays at Washington Square Park, there would be music around the square there. And I went down, I heard incredible sounds, all different types, bluegrass, old-timey, blues. I just couldn't believe it. My eyes were just bugging out of my head. And I said, well, that's the type of music I want to learn how to play. So I started to learn how to do a couple of old folk tunes. I remember I had an old dog, his name was Blue, that was one of them. And I would keep going down to the village and hanging out there, and there was a place called the Folklore Center. And I went in one day, and there was a fellow called Jack Perlusky who was working there, and he was playing a tune. And I said, wow, man, that's great, what is it? And he said, Let Us Get Together. And I said, who does it? And he said, well, Reverend Gary Davis does it. I said, oh, wow. And I had never heard of Gary Davis. Went home, and about the next day, again, just a funny, the way the stars are or something. A friend of mine called Bob Fox, he called up and said, hey, I have an idea. I think you should go see this guy, Reverend Gary Davis. He gives lessons. And all of a sudden, 1 + 1 = 2 sort of rang in my head. And I said, how strange. I don't even know his music, but I just heard one of his tunes by a fella down in the village. Do you have his phone number? So I called up Reverend Davis, and he answered the phone. He said, yeah, here's my address, and bring your money, honey. If you bring your money, honey, and it's $5 a lesson. So I went to my dad and my mom, and I said, well, I'm going to go up to the Bronx because I'm going to have a lesson with a blind black Baptist preacher called Reverend Gary Davis. And they, without even flinching, my father said, oh, how strange, because I have to buy a pair of shoes up in the Bronx on Saturday. I'll drive you up. I didn't even think second thoughts about it. So he drove me up to Claremont, I believe it was Claremont Avenue or Claremont Parkway, and I had never seen a block like that in my life. It was with tenements, but half the windows were blown out. It looked like Dresden after the war. And Reverend Davis didn't live there. He lived behind the tenements, in a shack, literally a shack. And you would walk down an alleyway, up some stairs. I knocked at the door. He opened the door, and he said, hey, Stefan, you bring your money, honey. And that was the beginning of 2 years of solid learning from one of the great masters of fingerstyle guitar, an absolute amazing musician. He would play tunes, what he called old-fashioned picking, like Candyman, you got the Pocketbook, I got the key. He would do ragtime tunes like 12 Sticks. He'd do gospel tunes, just amazing, amazing gospel tunes. And he's the one that really got me very involved and focused on playing the guitar. At the same time, as I was going to Reverend Davis, I was hanging out with a lot of friends who played guitar, and they were also interested in blues. One was Nick Pearls, who founded Yazoo Records, Steve Katz, who was in Blood, Sweat, and Tears and the Blues Project, and he at that time was taking lessons from Dave Van Ronk, and Steve and I became real close, good buddies. And we would start to try to listen to LPs. And to be honest with you, when I would get my Woody Guthrie LP, I would hear him sing, it sounded all right. But when I got a Big Bill Broonzy, and the only reason I would pick up a Big Bill Broonzy album was the name, Big Bill Broonzy. It sounded so romantic. Blind Blake, Blind Lemon Jefferson. I mean, these names just intrigued me. And when I would put the needle on the LPs, the music that would come out would just be, I couldn't believe it. Big Bill Broonzy, if you just have a listen to him, I mean, it just sent chills up and down your back. And at the same time, I was starting to meet record collectors, and they started playing us old 78s that you couldn't find on LPs of Robert Johnson, Skip James, Son House, Charlie Patton. So I'm still going to Gary Davis, but I'm also hearing all this other music. And I'm learning how to play the guitar, and some of my friends are spreading out and they're going down to Mississippi, some even ending up from Mississippi, ending up in Rochester, and they're rediscovering people like Mississippi John Hurt and Son House and Skip James and Bucka White. And I got to be quite friendly with Mississippi John Hurt. I would hang out an awful lot. And his playing was quite different from Reverend Gary Davis's. He used just the skin of his fingers. He just used 3 fingers, the thumb, index, and middle, whereas Gary Davis just used thumb and index. And his playing, though, John Hurt's was hypnotic. You wanted to learn every tune he could play. I'm satisfied, tickled too, old enough to marry you. I'm satisfied. It will bring you home, satisfied, tickled too, old enough to marry you. I'm satisfied. It will bring her back. I'm first in the country, then in town. Pull my pants to my navel on down. I'm satisfied. It will bring her home, satisfied. Tickled too, old enough to marry you. I'm satisfied. It will bring her back. I'm satisfied, tickled too, old enough to marry you. I'm satisfied. It will bring you home, satisfied, tickled too, old enough to marry you. I'm satisfied. It will bring her back. Play around now. Once I took Mississippi John Hurt up to Gary Davis's house, and I wanted them to meet each other and to play. They didn't play together. They played a tune each, for each other. And the next day I went up to Reverend Davis's house and I said, that wasn't that great? And he was a very competitive musician, and as a teacher, he always wanted to make sure he was the man, that he could stay a couple of steps ahead of all of his students, which he easily did. But I said, well, you didn't like John Hurt's playing? He said, yeah, it's all right, but it's old-fashioned picking. And I said, well, it's old-fashioned picking. Do you do any of that? And all of a sudden, he started playing a whole bunch of tunes. One was You Got the Pocketbook, I Got the Key, which fascinating, totally different than the way John Hurt approached playing in the key of C or playing this type of alternating bass, as I call it, and very unique. Skip James was a masterful guitar player. When we heard his old 78s that he recorded in the 1920s, some of the tunes we thought, well, he must be in an open E tuning, and there was one called Special Rider, which I thought probably was an open G, not too sure. And then when he was rediscovered, it turned out that all those tunes we thought were played in open E were actually played in what he called cross note tuning, where the guitar is tuned to an open E minor chord. But sure enough, Special Rider was an open G. And I sat down quite a few times with him to try to learn and understand the way he approached playing the guitar, which is very unique. And Special Rider is one of my favorite tunes. It's in open G, has two different sections. It's a tune that was made popular on the piano by Little Brother Montgomery, yet Skip's version on the guitar is totally different. I don't even see how it connects to it, but when he taught it to me, he said, well, this is from Little Brother's playing. But check this out. Playing blues guitar is, I love it. And I had many of my friends, Steve Mann, John Renbourn, they play other music, but they also play blues guitar. And Steve Mann was from Los Angeles, and he came to New York in the early 60s, and we used to hang out an awful lot. And he had a very distinct approach to playing. And what I tried to do is sort of take from him, take from there, take from that, try to combine a lot of different influences and put them together in various instrumentals. And I put together one for him that I call Blues for the Man, which sort of has the feeling in my ears of, there was another guitar player called Dick Rosmini, Steve Mann, Snook Seeglin. And it has a second section which is a little bit like Robert Johnson, sort of a potpourri of different blues in A, and out came this. And just fiddling around on the guitar, it's lovely. And here's a tune I always had fun with. It's called Just a Closer Walk with Thee. Played in the open G tuning, sort of combining, I guess, a little bit of Chet Atkins type of guitar playing, which is a little bit more sophisticated harmonically, and the approach is a little bit more sophisticated than the music that I usually play. And I combine that with a second section, which is more blues-oriented. But it's a fun tune to play. When you have a beautiful melody and you can figure out an arrangement that's half decent, you just run with it. In 1967, I moved to Europe. I lived in Italy and in England. Lived there for 20 years. And in Italy, where I lived for 14 of those 20 years, I would be doing concerts with lots of different guitar players. And I had started writing books on guitar playing, not for students, but really for myself. And being isolated in Italy, in Rome, where I was living, in Montepozio Cattoni, I thought, well, all these great guitar players that I'm hanging with, let me ask them if they want to do lessons, because basically these lessons were done so that I could learn how to play like Ton van Bergek, like Leo Weinkamp, like Larry Coryell, or to document people like John Fahey, Dave Van Ronk, important musicians of the last century. They really had a story to tell in the history of the evolution of fingerstyle guitar. And I started to do that, and it really grew into what's called Stefan Grossman's Guitar Workshop, where we have audio lessons, we have visual lessons on video and DVDs, but they were basically done so I could make sure that I could learn how to play like all these guys. Because my philosophy is, you learn, just keep learning. Learn as much as you can from everybody, because no matter what comes out is going to sound like you. No matter how much I try to imitate like Mississippi John Hurt, Reverend Gary Davis, Son House, Skip James, no matter how hard I try, I always end up sounding like Stefan Grossman. You can't avoid it. But by trying to really imitate as much as you can, it's my feeling that you really can delve into their psyche, their mind, their fingers, their way of approaching music, and then you can grasp it and learn it, and then it becomes part of your own.